and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I'm here with Cassandra. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Matt. I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing very well. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. And I'd love, as we get started, if you could tell people who you are and introduce yourself, because I definitely couldn't do your introduction justice.
All right. Yeah, no problem. So my name is Cassandra Lam, and I am currently the founder of Akin, which is a digital storytelling platform that is quite recently launched, actually, just 2 months old, 2 months and some change. So essentially, it's a platform designed to empower a more human narrative. That's the tagline. And what is a more human narrative? That's like naturally the question, right? And my belief is that it's inherently an inclusive one, meaning we should be involving as many perspectives as possible to have something that truly reflects the diversity of the human race. So I attempt to do that by creating a platform to kind of house, safeguard, collect, curate anonymous short form 5 to 7 sentence stories from people around the world.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think it's powerful. I love talking with you because you're also a storyteller of sorts. So I definitely want to learn more about Akin and that side of things. But first and foremost, what's your backstory? Like, how did you end up coming up with Akin, and what were you doing way before Akin? You mentioned how new it is.
So it's always so funny to look back and to think about like your own backstory, because you look at all these things that probably didn't make sense at the time, and where I am today, I look back and it's like I had to do those exact things to get here. So I went to college out in LA, so I'm from California originally, graduated UCLA, poli-sci, thinking like I'm going to become a lawyer, like I'm going to make change by in the courtroom, or perhaps working with the government. And then as I was preparing for the LSAT and thinking about what are the next 3 years going to be like and applying, I kind of hit this wall where I wasn't enthusiastic or excited about taking this arduous and stressful test. And I kind of realized, like, if I'm not excited to take this test, then there might be something wrong here. And I realized that I had fallen victim to something that I think happens a lot to people in college, especially when you go to a college where there's a lot of pressure for you to figure out, like, what are you doing after senior year? Do you have your life figured out? Like, you went to UCLA, why don't you know, right? It's like, it's almost this weird pressure that we put on ourselves. Our peers kind of like all feed into it. So I definitely was, it was an eye-opening experience, I'll say that, realizing that, like, oh crap, I don't have it all figured out, whatever that means, right? Mm-hmm. And how do I bounce back from that? What do I do from there? Because I went from thinking, this career is going to be stable and great, and I think I'll be good at it. So from that moment on, I took a completely different mentality to the rest of my life, because I realized up until that point, it was like driving with your blinders on, just like focused on one end result at the end of the tunnel, and not taking the time to explore other interests. So I was like, nope, the rest of my life, I'm going to explore every single interest and do anything that excites me, and not just do things because someone else or society has said, like, that's good for you. You should do that, or you'll make enough money doing that. So I started working a bunch of different jobs. I had done a lot of law firm work, obviously a very corporate setting. I went into, I actually worked at a CPG beverage company for a while doing community outreach. Then I bounced into like some startups out in LA, and then eventually found a job that moved me out here to New York, where I am today. So big data consulting here, which is not at all related to Akin. But through my more than 2.5 now, close to 3 years of consulting, one thing that you become very accustomed to is the concept of storytelling, because there's a lot of putting together a presentation or a pitch for a client, and like a lot of times you're trying to craft a narrative, often using data or using like a hypothesis that's been tested, and presenting that to somebody. So I've started my training more formally in terms of storytelling through my work, but what really off Akin and this whole need in my need to fulfill something much larger than myself was my trip to Barcelona this past fall. I was just meeting up with a friend that I hadn't seen since high school. So definitely, I think like seven years at that point. And we just picked back up like nothing, which was really, really interesting. And in conversation, I was realizing how special and unique every single human being is. Like, we walk by all these people, strangers or friends or family on the street, and there's a lot underneath the surface that you never come to know and might never surface, and a lot of questions people have never been asked before. So I started thinking like pretty deeply about how important it is to have people feel inspired to tell their story, have people feel like their lives are worth talking about, to people to kind of step outside of themselves for a second and see that the things that might seem minute or boring or just, you know, maybe sometimes even depressing, right? Because life is hard. All these like things that make up your life are completely your own, and unless you share them with somebody, you know, that could die with you. And that, I just thought that was really sad. Like, why don't we feel more empowered? Why don't more people feel like they are welcome to share? And I think the problem is access to platforms, or maybe not being not living in a society that has necessarily encouraged a lot of other diverse or non-normative narratives. So I was like, okay, I don't know if a platform like the one that I'm envisioning exists, so why don't I try and make it?
So I think that's an awesome approach. And I think one thing that's so cool about your story is that there are so many twists and turns. Like, there's,
So
I think for a lot of people, like, you think in your head there's this one perfect way that things are supposed to go, and that for you to get where you want to be one day, that it has to follow that path and it has to be linear. But really it's not, and that's not the way that life actually works. Like, that's the way that movies work, but it's not the way that like real humans live. And so I think it's cool that you took the time to experiment. And now with Akin, it's powerful that you're really empowering people to share their stories. What do you think it was? I know a lot of people who've had ideas. What do you think it was for you that actually pushed you past that line to actually create what you wanted to create, rather than just kind of putting the idea aside and saying like, oh, this is a great idea, I wish someone would do this one day, and then forgetting about it?
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. So that trip that kind of got me thinking about like, okay, how do we like get these stories out of people? Not just like for me, because like this platform isn't about me, but like for the world to cherish and enjoy. So that was September, and thought about it when I came back, so like October, November, December, and I just like kept thinking about it. And when I'm like sleeping, I would have like these ideas, or like while I'm at work and daydreaming, I would be coming up with, you know, like, this is what I think it could look like, or like maybe this feature should be added, or like this is how I want the stories to be shown on the platform. I just kept having these like bubbles of thoughts, and it was a creative outlet that I think I really lacked in my life. I work in a data intensive, kind of analytics driven role, and there's not a lot of room for me to necessarily use my brain in the specific way that I was using it for the ideation process of Akin. And last year was just a big turning point. You know, I had just gone through a lot of different things in life, and starting to feel much more comfortable in my own skin, much more comfortable with the idea of like being a creator. This is something that I've struggled with for a long time. Like, in terms of, you know, being able to say that out loud, which is so powerful. And I come from the camp where I actually believe all human beings are creators, and I don't know when we stop thinking that, or owning that like entirely. And I think that statement is not insignificant either. Like, every day we are creating something, we're creating value, and maybe some people are creating more in your face things, like creating companies, or, you know, creating products to sell on Etsy, or creating art. But that concept of like, I am a creator, was something that I didn't really see for myself up until last year. And after I became comfortable with that idea, that's how it became much more natural for me to, first of all, think of Akin and think of the fact that, like, I could do this. And to be fair, like, thank God for the digital age, because now it's like we're all capable of testing and trying things out without much like upstart cost. And there's so many resources, both like free and paid online now, where you don't have to kind of like just trial and error in the dark, if you will. And something that you're trying to do, there's probably someone who's tried to fail before that you can learn from. And so I feel like we're now in a point in time in like technology and with the internet, where I could really put something out there and just see how people like it, see how it makes me feel. And it's not going to require a lot of capital. It's not going to require too much like blood, sweat, and tears. There are definitely some sweat and tears, but other than that, I was like, you know what, I could just do this. And like, so what if it doesn't work out? What is failure anyway, right? Like, and I guess that goes back to like, what is success? Like, I felt like it's just important for me to put it out there, because especially with like 2017 being such a rough year for all, I think we need more positivity out there, and this is like my way of putting it out there. So January 1st, I was like, you know what, I'm a creator. I'm going to try to find a team to help me, and let's see if we can make this happen.
Yeah, and I think that's really awesome. Also, another awesome point that, like, you wanted to create something, and because of the internet and all of our digital tools, the barriers to entry were like so much lower, so that you could get your idea out there. And I feel the same way. Like, it's so easy to put something out there. Sure, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's a lot easier than it would be if you were trying to start a storefront business to do the same thing that you're doing, for instance. But I think one thing that's also cool is that through the internet, you could get people from all walks of life to share their stories through your platform. What are some of those stories, or some examples of stories that come to mind for you as just really standout examples of why you do what you do?
Yeah, there are actually two stories that immediately come to mind. The first one is one that haunts me deeply. And I think for any founder or creator, when you put something out there and you get like your first sort of batch of things, for me, stories, right? That first batch inherently just means so much. These are people who have entrusted me and my brand and my platform to house, protect, and elevate their voices. And that's something that I do not take lightly. But the first story that I think about all the time is one that really like shook me to my core when I first read it. And it's story number 5 on our platform. And I can actually, if you don't mind, I would like to just actually pull it up so that I can read it.
Sure thing.
Properly, because this one's a good one.
I'm already getting goosebumps.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for it. It's being a little.
No worries. Yeah, stories are so powerful, and it's a little bit like I could relate so much to what you're saying about like that first batch of stories. But like, even through what I'm doing, I've had some interviews with people who like it kind of shakes you a little bit, because it is so real and raw. And you're about to share one of those stories, so.
Yeah, and like to know that this is like somebody out there who went through something and like, you know, wanted to trust me with it. That, I don't know, that's a powerful thing, and I know you super appreciate that. Okay, so I found it. I just like to take a moment to read it. At 14, I remember thinking my mother weak. She was weak because she didn't leave my father, even when he screamed drunken slurs at her and smashed her dinner dishes into the walls. She was weak because she didn't say a word as she watched him push and shove and berate me to the edge of my fragile sense of self-worth. Unlike her, I would grow up to be fierce and strong. And yet here I was at 24, hugging knees to chest and sobbing on the bathroom floor. The love of my life roared at me. You always fucking say you're going to lose weight, and then you don't. Get on the scale right now and show me how much weight you've lost. Never mind that he knew the legacy of the eating disorders that had tormented my adolescent years. How do we end up here? So that one resonates so deeply with me because I think a lot about how many families endure generational trauma, and how much of like our lives as they unfold in the ways that they do carry that trauma along. And oftentimes, like you are not aware, and I think that's a very human thing too. You're not aware of the ways in which you were raised or the things that you saw when you were growing up in whatever your environment was affect you until I think you are put in that same position and you kind of see like, did I respond the way that person did when I was young, or am I responding in a different? And I think to a degree, we all carry the successes and burdens of like our legacy, like our family, our parents, our grandparents, because all of that, like that lineage, I think it's so powerful. These are people who raised you, and for better or worse, they're giving you in part some of the things that they have struggled with. And that just reminded me of how dark I think being human is sometimes, and that's completely okay. And I love that this person was able to share that and to feel like this is not the best side of me. This is not the best thing that's happened to me, but here I am, and I'm saying it aloud because it matters. I really hate this whole like, as you get older, you kind of just project your LinkedIn version of yourself. That's what I call it. Like, this is me, Matt Scott, with all my accolades, and nothing's ever happened. And you know, like I went to a great school, you know, and I'm doing this awesome social impact work, which you are, by the way. But there's a lot even behind that, right? And I think as we get older and we are more refined and polished about how we present ourselves, a lot of the beautiful nitty gritty and darkness is pushed aside. So that story completely embodied like how being human is a full spectrum experience. It's a multidimensional experience.
And just to dive in and comment on that before you tell me about the other story, like that story is really powerful to me for a number of reasons, and it drives home a lot of the points that you were just saying. But like first and foremost, like I think the fact that it doesn't have a name associated with it does a number of things. Like one, it helps the reader put themselves into that situation or into that person's story. So like, I don't know if this is a man or woman. I think in this case, I don't definitely know. Like, I don't know like what race they are or what socioeconomic status or like I know their age, but like I don't really know anything beyond that. And I think that helps people to understand because not just from the perspective of the reader, but also from the perspective of the person who's telling the story. Because this ties into your other point where, you know, you look at social media and it's always like what you're saying, this LinkedIn version of yourself. And like for me, I'll say it's so funny because like as a digital storyteller, social media strategist, and so on and so forth, like I'm so aware of that too. And it's good. Like it's good to share the good news, but like I'm even sick of just sharing the good news because I'm thinking like there's all this nuance there. There's all this stuff like highs and lows. And I think in a lot of ways, especially considering how much people are sharing about their accomplishments, like it's so much more powerful when you see the struggle and when you see like what's really difficult about someone's life. Because I mean, I think that that's what's truly beautiful, because it's so easy to share just the positive stuff. And so I definitely applaud you for giving people a platform to share the stuff that's not, you know, not traditionally thought of as beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, just to go back to your point really quickly, Facebook is not a proper platform, I think, for sharing the human side of people. I'm just thinking right now, like let's say we flip the script on the newsfeed, and instead of it being this like picture perfect version of everybody and all the cool things they're doing, right? What if it were the opposite? What if like people were just talking about the mundane, or people were just talking about the bad? I think like we wouldn't necessarily be happy with that either. So altogether, I just think Facebook is not even the right place for presenting you as you are. I think it's a form of communication. It's a way to get information. But that's why I think it's important that we create these outlets, whatever they are, whether it's Akin or Medium. Some people use Reddit or Quora. Having a place where that side of you can be presented and not manipulated or used in a way that you wouldn't like it to be used. So I mean, Facebook is a very interesting beast. But I definitely agree. I think part about somebody is the grit and like the dust in the corners, if you will, like the skeletons in the closet. That stuff is what makes you who you really are.
Yeah, and I think like I'm so glad you said that. I just want to add this other thought just to put it out there, though I'm sure you know. I think it's so important for people to understand like what these tools actually are. Like to understand that Facebook is not so and
That's your
so's
friend.
life. Like it's not your friend. It's not this person's life. You know, it's just what they choose to put out there. And I think a lot of people with social media especially look at Snapchat and see their friends posting stories of like the cool places they're traveling and the great brunches that they're having.
Mhm.
Or they like, you know, go to Instagram and see the beautiful sites people are seeing. And it's so important for people to know, like, disclaimer, that is not real life. These are not people's lives. Now, I think what you're doing with the kin is doing the opposite, where it's saying, like, forget how you look through your story, just tell your story and tell the reality of your life. So it's like completely opposite to what we see with social media. But I definitely want to give you space to share about the second story because it's like it feels like a cliffhanger right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. You're right. It is the reality of humanity is the more exciting part. So this other story is a little more lighthearted. So I'll just get into it. And just so people know, this is story number 4. As a child of immigrants, one of the key moments in my life was finally visiting my parents' homeland as an adult. It wasn't so much the culture shock as much as finally realizing who my parents were in the eyes of their family. For so long, I'd simply known them as mom and dad, but gaining context on who they were once upon a time allowed me to gain a brand new appreciation of who they are. They didn't just leave behind family, they left behind an entire town that gladly embraced them when they returned, something that I wasn't able to truly grasp until that trip. That trip showed me the true value of community. And what I love about this one is that I think we all realize, like at some point in time, that our parents are just people too, and our parents are not just people, but are people with full lives and series of experiences, many of which we, as the children, would never know about. And you know, like when you think of them as just mom and dad, they're like these one-dimensional characters, right? Like these people raised me. I love them, and like you know, they taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels, and they bought me lunch up until I went to college every single day for school and things like that. And when you realize that they're just human too, like that there are dark sides to them, there are experiences that they would not be comfortable talking about as well, and so much of your relationship, I think, like as the child becomes more full because you're like, whoa, these people I've known all my life, they've had a full life before me, and you know they continue to have lives, like even as like I'm in their life, and you only know a percentage of it, I think, until that switch turns on and you start, you know, maybe asking your parents questions about, you know, what was it like going through this, or like what were you feeling when that happened. And I just think that's such a funny thing that happens, if I may say this, to all children at some point.
Yeah, and it's so funny to think about because like as we get older and as we realize like, you know, our parents are, you know, whole people, not necessarily these perfect figures or not just parents, not just mom and dad or whatever, but they're people. Then, you know, lots of people go through that process of you have your own kids who have to gain that appreciation too. And sometimes it takes, you know, 20 years or whatever it might be to get to that point. So it's interesting. And I think what's also cool is that as you explained that, like, I think that's a shining example of how the stories from the site relate to people who read them. That's really, really powerful. And there's like a universal aspect to it, which makes them all really helpful. Because my parents weren't immigrants, but yet at the same time, I could still understand that key point that you were driving home.
Yeah.
I think, like, I want to know from you, what's your vision for Akin? What do you ultimately want to accomplish?
So right now, I am focusing on growing the community. One amazing thing that I've learned in launching this about like 2.5 months ago is that storytelling is the result of a process that you have to go through internally. And I think our lives as human beings are so complicated, and it's often scary to be what's happened to you, or like what do you want, what are you comfortable sharing, what are you not comfortable sharing, like kind of digging through your own dark box, right? It's a process. And so like getting stories is something that I'm focusing on. Like, how do I cultivate more people to share their stories, so that way the platform can grow, and then people who are currently reading it have more stories to look forward to. And so in order to do that, and this is something that I've always dreamed of doing, I'm actually working on putting together a dinner series centered around storytelling and like expansive conversation. We're going to be tackling like narrative, engaging in like community style dialogue. So it's currently in the works. I have a pilot dinner planned for the end of the month, but I'm hoping that this is something that I can bring to communities here in New York and across the United States eventually. I don't yet have a name for it, and this is kind of like a sneak peek teaser, and I actually like that I'm telling you very publicly on video because it's going to allow me to follow through. But essentially the idea is storytelling in person is sometimes a little easier, and as somebody who loves connecting with people and inspiring people to kind of, like, as cheesy as it sounds, be the best version of themselves as possible, I want to have like an in-person interaction with the community and see like, okay, like what are the questions that we can work on and through discussion that will help people feel more comfortable with storytelling. Because I do think it's a practice. And a lot of times we don't tell our stories because we think they need to be perfect, or we don't know how to start. And, you know, like sometimes you just have to start. Sometimes you just have to have a couple of those versions that maybe like are not your best, right? But like you just need, it's a practice. So my vision right now is like building the community, maybe increasing the following and getting more readers, so that way hopefully the effect of like reading these stories can continue to inspire more people to share. And I do think the stories that are currently on the platform are really powerful, so I want to spread the word as far as I can. And from there, I guess I'm gonna see if I can take the dinner series into like a monthly thing that I do here in New York, and maybe like wherever I go to travel. I'm thinking about maybe doing dinners in collaboration with different organizations, you know, like nonprofits, collectives, you know, what have you, groups of people, communities, and seeing how storytelling can empower like their work. So that's something that I'm super excited about, because I love eating, and then eating with people, and then getting together and having like just open dialogue, honest as hell conversation, if I can say that. Like, that doesn't happen enough, I think, in society today. And it just goes back to what you're saying about like your social media persona.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it takes somebody to interact with another person who also wants to be honest. To how do I inspire that? Because like, you know, let's combat all this social media with like honesty and intention and connection with real human beings.
I think that is all so powerful. And what you're saying about like spreading the word and about making this something that's not just online but in person reminded me of something called the Before I Die wall. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but Candy Chang, who was a TED fellow, is a woman who created basically this movement where people created walls in their community that said, before I die, I want to blank, and just the blank line there, and people would walk up to it and write in, what they want to do before they died. And, it could be something that's as dumb as like get a triple burger at Burger King or something like that. I don't know. But like, it would be a lot of deep stuff that was like really real. Like, before I die, I want to like see my family member who I haven't seen in 2 decades or whatever it might be. And, I experienced that. I met Candy at one point, but I experienced it because it came to my university, George Washington University. And it was like that same idea of like making this general thing very real. Like because what you're doing is so powerful online, but there's also so much potential to make something amazing from it in person, and you're definitely going to do that with the dinners. And so when you're in Washington DC, let me know so I can be one of the partner people hosting that dinner.
Yeah, no, I've already started making my like little short list of like, okay, once like I get out of like pilot, and like I make sure that the programming that I have in mind works and resonates with people. I have my little like guinea pigs. I'm going to be testing it shortly. I'm definitely like, you're already on the list of people I want to reach out to. And yeah, like let's make magic happen. For a long time, I was so concerned, like, am I the right person to build Akin?
Right.
Am I like credentialed enough to do a dinner series and like engage people in storytelling exercises and like asking them, questions that will help them get comfortable with that? And then I realized, well, A, I don't think there's a credential for that. Definitely not. And B, why not me? If I haven't been engaged in this way and I believe so deeply in it, then why don't I just try it? And it goes back to the barrier of entry thing. It's like, what is the harm? Like, people just walk away like, having eaten great food and then, had a great conversation. Then that's already like a huge win for me, because I feel, I'm sure you feel the same way, but whenever I have like genuine dialogue with somebody, like the way that we are now, like I leave so fulfilled, and I'm like much more grounded in my plans and like the things that I want to do. And then you make another connection too. You never know how that connection could help you, or you could help them. So
yeah,
why not? That's like the whole theme of the project. Why not me? And why not now?
Yeah, why not me and why not now? And I love having these conversations because it reminds me, like, sure, I am doing what I'm doing with 108 Degrees of Impact, but like there are ideas I've had to do other things. Like, why not me and why not now? And I think once you ask yourself that question, that brings you like a huge step closer to actually doing whatever you have in mind. Like, what's your, I guess I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, what is it about you that makes you this way, where you just decided, to ask that question, why not me, why not now? And like, more importantly, I guess a better question is, what's your advice for other people who are struggling to like take that leap and actually do something?
Mm-hmm. So I would like to preface this by saying I am speaking just based on my own experience and things that I have come to understand about the world by virtue of being a Southeast Asian woman who has had some privileges, but also not had some privileges. I grew up in a household where Asian parents, you had 3 career choices: engineer, doctor, lawyer. Very early on, told my parents I'm not going to become a doctor or an engineer. So lawyer went out the door, as we previously talked about. And so when you're raised in that kind of household, you aren't, like, I guess, comfortable with and things outside your realm of possibility, because that was the realm of possibility for so long. I think the moment that I shattered that, and I realized that, look, I need more than these three options. Really propelled me into this completely different mentality, like in opposition to my parents, if you will, because it was just like, I'm determined to make something of myself, for myself, but of course I want to make you proud too, and I want to prove to them, to me, my younger sister, to the world, that you can have a fulfilling career without, following the mold or following the crowd. So much of my thinking about like, why not me, why not now, has come through like really intense experimentation and opposition to like that cookie cutter career lifestyle and mentality, which I think is actually really toxic, because we're not encouraging people to pursue things that they deeply care about. We're encouraging them to think about the paycheck or think about stability, or and there's nothing wrong with that if that is okay with you, but what if that's not okay with you? And then also, being a woman, I've endured some really like crappy workplace scenarios. A lot of times where you're in a meeting and you say something, and the men in the room are looking at each other but maybe not looking at you, and then they'll respond to you but they'll be looking at each other. Little microaggressions like that. And I'm a very fiery, stubborn person, and so when you go through things like that, it's only helped to ground me further in my desire to prove them, whoever them is, them wrong. And so the whole why not me, why not now mentality comes from the fact that, like, what do you have to lose by putting yourself out there? Honestly, I think oftentimes we cripple and paralyze ourselves into doing nothing because we're so concerned with, like, how are people going to react? And as I've grown older and hopefully a little wiser, I've just realized that most people are too worried about their own lives to really care about you. And that's not like innate in a negative way, but like just a matter of fact statement. Most people are too concerned with their own lives and their own insecurities, fears, anxieties to really give a shit about like what you do, and like if you look goofy doing it, or like or if like, and if these people are truly like your friends, and if you have a really good supportive network, they're going to be there for you regardless, right? And so in the end, the only person that you hurt by not pursuing that idea that keeps you up at night is yourself, because you're always going to wonder, what if, like, why didn't I just do that? And the longer you wait, I think like it just sits inside of you, and it's heavy, and it's something that's fighting and crawling to come out, and it's almost like your duty, I think, to pursue it if it's causing you to feel that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that was so awesome. Because that's the thing, like, we all get so tied up in like what other people think, and what's going to happen. It's especially with what we're doing with putting ourselves out there by having projects. Like, I've met so many people who are doing the same thing, who are so concerned with just this notion of what do people think. Like, some people might love it, other people might hate it, and they get wrapped up in that. And I think once you get past that and realize, like, okay, like, I'm having nerves about this, but like other people have nerves also, and they're focused on themselves. Like, once you get past that, you're so much more powerful and capable of doing what you want to do. And speaking of what you want to do, because I know we could go on forever, I want to ask about like what you're going to do about your life story. So my question is, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why?
I had to think long and hard about this one, and I think it's actually quite fitting. The name, and I think it would be a documentary versus a book. Book would come after the documentary, because if the book comes out before, like, people are always like, it's not the same. It would be called Life of a Phoenix, and the reason why I say that is because, and I hope this has come out in our conversation, I think it has, I have died and been reborn so many different times in so many different aspects of my life, and this transcends just like the professional the professional version. And I think that is so important for people to realize that you will die and come back to life so many times in your singular life. Like obviously we have one physical life, right? But when you look back on your past, I think you can see really like clear divisions over time of like when you became a more evolved version of you that wasn't just like yes, you're Matt Scott, that like there's the Matt Scott that was, in college, and maybe the Matt Scott that started working in social impact, and then maybe the Matt Scott that's here today. But I think there are clear distinctions of like, I really changed and I became more and more like myself over these different lives, and more like in my own skin, in my own happiness, and maybe in my own fulfilling whatever it is that you do that you love. So having gone through that, and some life is hard. Sometimes you don't want to be reborn, but something happens to you and triggers that. So that's not to say that this is always like a positive thing. Sometimes we're reborn and like it's just a change. Like I don't think like change should be colored as positive or negative per se. Change is just is, and it happens to us all the time. So having been reborn so many times, I have now become so excited by that idea versus being scared before. Being scared that like the person I am today, oh my God, I might not be like that forever. Like what am I going to be like? Am I going to suck at this, but like, be better at this? And so the more I think you try to control that versus just doing exactly what makes you feel good and what makes you want to wake up every morning and what makes you feel really connected to your purpose, that is so much more important. And then just know that there's always another day, there's always another dawn, and it is always darkest before light, but you will be reborn, and that's just a fact. And so I don't know, like everything leading up to Akin has been a series of reckonings, and almost if you can see it as like I was just starting to bubble with like all this creative energy that I never realized I had before, and then it kind of just exploded, and I was just like, whoa, now what do I do with it? And then so I think like 2017 was like when I realized I was like, I want to live like a phoenix, like because I really feel like every time I come out of like the fog, I'm like, I'm not the same person as I was, maybe June 2015 last year. That's for sure. But like, just, I don't know, when you see yourself as a phoenix, I think it's really powerful. And we all have the power to feel that way and to own our lives. And I think to do something with it. So that's the name of my documentary.
I'm such a fan of that answer. Your last couple of answers especially have had me like, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love it because I loved the idea of the phoenix for such a long time, that imagery and this idea of like change does happen in life, and sometimes I think just naturally the way that human beings work, like we again and again will run into a point that's like the low in our life. Like when you're a baby and you drop your rattle, like that's the low for the first time. And then maybe when you get a little older, it's like something else is much more of a low. But I think one thing that's so important is it's important to recognize, and I think you're doing a good job of this. I'm learning this, that like we are phoenixes in each in our own right, but we're also all survivors in different ways, and it might be for multiple different things that we face and challenges we face. But I think once you realize that you're a survivor, you realize that you've been through it, and like as far as I'm concerned, I've always made it through whatever it might be. And I think that's reassuring for people who are really going through it, just knowing like you're going to make it through and it's going to be okay. Powerful lesson. We could go on forever. Where can people find Akin and you online? What are your links?
So the website for Akin is weareakin.co. And from there you can get the links at the bottom for our social media, primarily focusing on Instagram and Facebook right now, and learning as I go. I might need some social media strategy from you. But learning as I go, like how different platforms are better fit or worse fit for stories. But all the good stuff is definitely on the website. And I also have a personal website I maintain. It's CassandraLam.com. And my Instagram is Cass and the City. So it's a play off of Sex and the City.
It was available, so it's
yeah, and like I changed my Instagram handle right before I moved to New York, so it was like a shedding of the old me and the phoenix, like once again being reborn and coming onto Instagram, like in New York.
And the good news is you can move to any city you want and still keep the same handle.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was good thinking.
Yeah.
And for anyone who wants to get in touch with 108 Degrees of Impact, if you're not already, it's www.lets.care or at Let's You Care on Twitter, facebook.com/Let's You Care. So thank you again, Cassandra, for being part of this, first and foremost. Thank you. And for anyone else who wants to check out what's going on, anyone else who wants to make a change, again, check out the website and social media. And until next time, keep impacting.